use that in our conversation. So we start with that. Let me tell you that this book, Smart Brevity, The Power of Saying More with Less, is primarily about written communication. Yesterday, I did a book briefing for the town of Little Elm, Texas, on the book Super Communicators, written by Charles Duhigg, who also wrote The Power of Habit and Smarter, Faster, Better. I've done all of those books. And that book is on conversational interaction communication. It is a brilliant book, and it is a current whopping bestseller. So that was Super Communicators. Over my shoulder, I have a great book by Chip Heath and Dan Heath, the brothers, called Made to Stick. And if we ever have lunch together, I'll tell you about the curse of knowledge, and I'll elaborate on it. But here's what they say. When we communicate, we think the audience knows more than they know. It's our curse of knowledge. Since we know it, we think they know it. So you've got to always believe that you are dealing with novices who are smart people, but ignorant about what you're speaking about. Now, I've got an observation, and then we're going to start with something that I'm going to show you on the screen. Then we're going to work through the handout. Here's my observation. I'm an old guy, and I remember the Paul Newman scene in a famous movie where a guard is saying, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And a failure to communicate is deadly in terms of our effectiveness. If we don't communicate, then we are in trouble. And let me just tell you that I've been at this for a long time, and everybody knows that communication needs to be better. We need to pay better attention to it. We need to do a better job at it. And now get ready for this. We haven't gotten any better. And that's a problem. And so communication is something you have to work on. Now, I do book briefings on lots of books on lots of subjects, but I'm lucky on this one. This is my academic background. I did PhD level work in rhetoric from the University of Southern California, studying the ways people communicate over the centuries. And in the 20th century, that's when I was pretty much finishing my schooling, early 21st century. And so this is something that I have studied academically. And I think that we got to keep working on our communication. Now, here is the problem that this book is dealing with. We get too much written communication, email, websites, news sites, technology sites, on and on it goes. And we have learned, and boy, this is tough, we have learned to decide whether or not to keep reading in a split second. We'll read the first line, the headline, the opening sentence or two, and then we say, I want to read more or I don't want to read more. And I don't know about you, but I've got a reading list that's a mile long of things that I've saved to read that I have not read. And so that's a problem. Now, there is an old journalistic practice, and I'm going to share the screen now. And this journalistic practice is called the inverted pyramid. This is from Wikipedia, the inverted pyramid in journalism. And look at this graphic on the right. Most newsworthy info: who, what, when, where, why, and how. You put that first and up front. And so there's a great example of it, and that's from the night that Abraham Lincoln was shot. And this is a famous article that was written the night he was shot. And look at what it says. This evening at about 9:30 p.m., that's when, at Ford's Theater, that's where the president, while sitting in his private box with Mrs. Lincoln, Mrs. Harris, and Major Rathburn. That's who was shot by an assassin. That is what and how. So look at these questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. In one sentence, they answered who, what, when, where, and how, but not why, because they didn't know why this man shot Abraham Lincoln on that night at the theater. And so that's an example of brief, smart brevity. Now, let's go to the handout. And if you've got a physical copy, turn all the way to page 7. It looks like this, page 7 in the handout. The book is called Smart Brevity: The Power of Saying More with Less. And I really love the title, Smart Brevity. Don't be brief if you're not smart. It's got to have substance. You've got to have something to say. I teach in my speech class at college. I'm an adjunct professor in that. I teach all of my students that there are 2 elements to speaking and really to all communication. Here they are. Have something to say it very well. Everything you learn falls into one of those 2 categories. Have something of substance to say it very well. If you have shallow, no substance, but you say it well, you'll be entertaining, but it won't give any meat for people to learn from. If you have great substance, but you don't say it very well, then people won't listen. They won't attend. They won't pay attention. And so smart brevity, the power of saying more with less. Now, on the right, these are kind of the thesis quotes of the book. I'm going to read a few of them. The cold, hard truth: most people are lousy writers, including most of us on this webinar. We are mostly not great writers. And we are also, and this is equally important, fuzzy thinkers. So if we put out an email, put out a memorandum that is fuzzy and not written well, we're in trouble. I'm not going to broach the question today of using artificial intelligence, Google Gemini or Chat GPT, to help you with your writing. Don't use it entirely, but it is a tool. So that may be discussed later. The second quote on that right column: the bottom line, all of us confront an epic challenge. How do you get anyone to pay attention to anything that matters in this mess of communication? Our answer: adapt to how people consume content, not how you wish they did or they did once upon a time. Then change how you communicate immediately. You can do this quickly by adopting smart brevity. In this book, we will show you how strong words, shorter sentences, arresting teases, simple visuals, and smartly organized ideas transform writing from unnoticed to vital and remembered. Now, I really like the word remembered. You want to have memorable communication whenever possible. Drop down 3. The result of today's emails and all of the writing is billions of wasted words, roughly 1/3 of work emails that require attention go unread. That's important. People don't read your emails. You think they do. If you say, well, I sent an email, you're saying to yourself, I did communicate. There has been no communication until the person who got the email receives it and in one way or another responds to it. If you go back in your memory to your speech classes in college, you remember that communication, there's a sender a receiver. And so the message is sent, but it's not been communicated until it is truly received. Sender, receiver, with a channel in between. All right, the next quote down. Our solution to the fog of words is enticing people to produce and consume fewer of them, far fewer. We call it smart brevity. Now, on the left, about the authors, these men, and they're all men, learned how to communicate briefly on their website, Axios. They started Axios. It's a political news website. This is not a political book. And so the idea is that you have to get people's attention quickly. So in the bold part, Mike Allen has written a morning newsletter every day, 365 days a year for 15 years. You don't have to do anything else. Just read Mike Allen. Legendary Washington Post reporter Bob Woodward trumpeted on Morning Joe. Dan Pfeffer, White House communications director for President Obama, told the New York Times that Mike was the most powerful and important journalist in Washington. Well, this book is not about politics, but Mike Allen, one of the co-authors, and the three of them work together. Mike Allen takes his lessons learned about brief communication. All right, before we start, I already talked about the inverted pyramid, and here is that sentence from the article this evening at about 9:30. The U.S. Air Force calls this approach bluff, B-L-U-F, bluff, bottom line up front. It's mentioned in the book, but here's the idea. When you get an email, you want to know what it's about immediately. Now, this is a little delicate. Next month, I'm going to present a book on emotional intelligence. And so we've got this need to make a human connection. But when you make, and forgive the bluntness of this, a generic human connection, hope you're having a good day. Well, that, to people who want to get to the point, that's almost an intrusion. So you have to figure out when and how to do the human connecting stuff. But for the average person hard at work, they want to know what the point is. And so bottom line up front. He remembered, I'm reading here, and anything in this part of the handout in italics comes directly from the book. He remembered seeing long memos with a short summary up top labeled bluff. Bluff meant bottom line up front, the military's version of smart brevity. Everyone read the bluff, few read the whole memo. Circle that. Everyone read the bluff, but few read the whole memo. In elementary school, we learned who doing what. That simple formula always yields a riveting construction. Who is doing what? And so that's critical. Now, let me pause a minute. I've read most popular business-related books on communication that I know of. And there's a wonderful book by Frank Luntz. He is also political, and he's very conservative. But the book is worth reading. It's not about political communication. It does have a few political examples, but it's about all communication. And the book is called Words That Work by Frank Luntz. And he says this, and I think this is advice to always remember. When you're doing something of substance, you want a one-page executive summary. A one-page executive summary. Get everything you need in one page. Most of the people who read it will stop right there. But you have a few people who want lots of numbers and lots of supporting information and lots of notes on where they find additional stuff. And you want the full dose to follow. So in other words, you want to learn this phrase: to learn more, keep reading this. So here's the blunt summary. Here's the brief, smart summary, the one-page executive summary. Here's the supporting information. So that's from Words That Work, and it complements some of the principles taught in this book. The problem. I'm on the bottom bullet point. Now, at this point, I want you to kind of, if you've got this printed out, look at this page. Just look at it visually. You notice anything? Bold, 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 bold. People's eyes are drawn to bullet points and to bold. If you look at the earlier part of the handout, and we won't do that now, I may not even have time to get to much of it, you've got bold and big font. That's my attempt to put emphasis on key passages. Those are the best of my highlighted passages. But one of the things that they say in this book is you want to use bullet points and bold to draw the person's eyes to the key points. And so, about the authors, before we start, the problem. And then I've got one problem in bold. Now I'm reading. No one has the attention span that you wish they had, including you, including me. The big struggle now is how to get and keep people's attention. So they are not reading what you write, they are not listening to what you say, and they absolutely are not paying attention to the words on your slides. There are lots of studies that say PowerPoint slides have become so, everywhere present that people almost zone out when they see them. But Jeff Bezos at Amazon outlawed PowerPoint slides in his important meetings. There's a general in Europe, an American general, who outlawed PowerPoint slides in his troop briefings because people just zone out. The reason I am a fan of handouts and the reason I am a stickler for asking people to print them out is if you keep your pen handy, if you mark them up, if you circle key phrases, it's almost like the old practice of marking up a book. And so that's the value of that. So let's keep going. Other people are just like you. 90% admit to daydreaming and 72% do other work while in meetings. And I have spoken way too many times where people have their phone out looking at it while I'm speaking. I won't let my students do that, but I can't get away with making everybody put their phones down. And I know sometimes people have to have them on for emergency if they're in the emergency services. But the reality is you can't do two things at once. Let me say it again. You can't do two things at once. If you're listening to a presentation, you have to listen to the presentation. If you are communicating, you have to put your mind on communicating. You can't do two things at once. Okay, so if you have more than 20 words on a slide, try again, and rarely should you exceed 5 or 6 slides. Pay attention to the way Steve Jobs used visuals on slides compared to outlines of presentations on slides. All right, look at what's in bold. Sorry, but slides, notes, and teleprompters are bad crutches. I've got mixed emotions on one of those. If you study great speeches, they are written in advance, word for word. I have a dream. Nearly the whole speech until he got to the riff on the dream was in a manuscript. Watch his eyes when you watch the video. So teleprompters are a modern way to read your manuscript. But you want the focus on you and your words. And I want to focus when I'm doing a book briefing on the content of the book. That's why I pay attention to the book and to the handout. The next quote, it turns out about 80% of people stopped reading on the first page. Circle that and remember it. If you've got a 2-page memo, people stop on the first page. If it's a 1-page memo, they stop after the first paragraph or two, meaning they consumed at most 490 of our self-important words. We discovered that most people, casual readers, politicians, CEOs alike, read only the headline and a few paragraphs of most stories. And they wrote this in 2022, it will only keep getting worse. Boy, that's really sobering. Turn to page 8. Turn to page 8 in your handout. Most of the time, top of the page, this is a quote from the book. We listen to a podcast or sit through a meeting and don't remember a damn thing. Yeah, that's right. So now let's talk about how to do it. The beginning point. Short, not shallow. That is a great phrase. Circle it. Short, not shallow. Short, not shallow is what we tell our reporter. Mastering both parts, making something smart and brief, sharpens thinking, saves time, and cuts through the noise. You know, one of the most famous books on how to write well says, use short words, have short sentences. So you want it short. Now, this is not poetry. This is business writing, getting things done writing. Here's the formula. Short, no shorter than that. These are my words to describe their formula. Shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs, shorter words. Short words are strong words. A general rule, a 1-syllable word is stronger than a 2-syllable word, is stronger than a 3-syllable word. The big idea, the main point, the actual point, right at the beginning. Then why it matters. And then go deeper for those who choose to, the very few who choose to, then you go deeper and you communicate, okay, that was the point. Here is the supporting information. It's the Frank Luntz executive summary versus supporting material. So here's a quote. Giving your reader the power to go deeper is an exit line from a smart brevity item that makes the reader feel fulfilled and allows you to point to context without a glob of words that's going to lose the audience. Here's the secret. Most won't go deeper. Ending your item with go deeper is efficient and elegant and shows your reader that smart brevity doesn't come at the expense of nuance or context. So I want you to remember, and I'm going back to look for a quote, just a second. Here we go. We're jumping around. Page 5, the very bottom of the page. Page 5, the bottom of the page. Number 58. One thing we can guarantee you with certainty. If you don't know your 1-sentence takeaway, there's no chance your audience will either. You've got to have your message and have it in a 1-sentence takeaway in your own mind. You've got to be clear about it. And if you're clear about it, and then you pound them, hit them over the head with your point, that's what they say in that quote, so that they get the point, then you have successfully communicated. So it goes back to my old formula, have something to say, and then say it very well. Let's add a phrase, as briefly as possible. So have something to say it very well, as briefly as possible. For those of you who know about rhetoric, that's my summary of two great of the five canons from Aristotle. Invention, have something to say, and delivery, say it very well. Okay, we're back on this page, on page 8. The formula, we're in the middle of the page. In their words, smart brevity in written form has 4 main points, all easy to learn and put into practice and then teach. Number 1, a muscular tease. Why should I read this? A tease. Number 2, one strong first sentence. In journalism, a lead. Your opening sentence should be the most memorable. Tell me something I don't know, I would want to know, I should know. Make this sentence as direct, short, and sharp as possible. If you read that article that I put up, the inverted pyramid on Wikipedia, if you pay attention to that structure, and then when you read news reports in newspapers or on websites, you will begin to be driven crazy by writers who make you read a bunch of stuff before you can figure out what the point of the article is. Drives you crazy. Drives me crazy. All right, I'm back to here. Number 3, context or why it matters. So I want you to read. Here's the point. Here's why it matters. And number 4, the choice to learn more or go deeper. Don't force someone to read or hear more than they want. Make it their decision. Always audience focused. Always. The gold standard always is what's best for the audience. The structure that is clearest and most efficient for a reader whose attention is being pulled in a million ways. The very first and 2 most important words of our company's manifesto can help you too. Audience first. I'm not going to bore you with how I got here, but here are the elements of good speaking, and they translate to good writing. The right speaker speaks the right message to the right audience at the right time, in the right way, with the right result. So the right speaker speaks the right message to the right audience in the right time, in the right way, with the right result. That's based on massive amounts of reading of all of the elements of effective communication. That's worth remembering. All right, some of their rules. Focus on one person you are targeting. Have that person in mind. That's an old radio rule. Speak to one listener. Plot out one thing you want them to remember. This is what happens in your brain, your thinking, so that you're not fuzzy in your thinking. And then think, and then type. Write like a human for humans. Then write it down. Then try to shorten it to fewer than a dozen words. Less is more. And then stop. I won't waste your time by saying, hi, hope you're having a good day. It's bullet points. Here's how you set up your utilities. No fluff. That's the idea. You get to the point. Now, circle this whole point next to the bottom. Circle this and burn it in your brain. Tell them this is the most important point. If there's only one thing you remember from this talk, this is what I want it to be. That's a great way to signal unmistakably what matters most and what you want people to take away. And so here's what I have as the point on the front page of this book. What is the point? To get your message heard, get to your point in as few words as possible. All right, bottom of the page, the tools. Headings, bullet points, lots of bullet points, People will skim nicely separated bulleted points, short paragraphs, 2-sentence paragraphs, as few words as possible, no fewer than that. The next page, we're on page 9, short subject lines in emails. The Axios audience team found that roughly 6 words is the optimal subject line for emails. Active verbs always. Active verbs always. Read it aloud. Confirm it sounds like something that would entice you to want to read more. The Wheel of Fortune rule, read only what is there and add nothing. Use emojis. In an email, you want the news or ask in the first sentence, always. After a meeting, after you meet, write the set while the session is fresh in your mind, shoot the group a quick email with a list of follow-ups. Bold your key lines. Repeat your key messages over and over and over again. Never offend. Be careful with your vocabulary. Become an expert with an expert's authority. The right speaker speaks the right message. But a warning, if your communication feels curt or overly curt, you've gone too far. Turn to page 10. And these are my 6 lessons and takeaways. Number 1, remember, I don't care what your job title is in whatever city you serve, you are in the communication business. Yes, you are. Number 2, remember that no one wants to actually read your communications or listen to them. I mean, have you ever said, I can't wait to read my next 20 emails? No, they want to have read them and listen to them, but they don't want to read and listen. They're too busy watching cat videos to be bothered by you. In other words, they want to know what they need to know as quickly as possible to get back to the other important stuff, which is probably more important than cat videos. Number 3, you have to think about and constantly refine and improve your communication with others, all kinds of communication with others. Number 4, do a serious examination of your communication. Emails, memos, reports, speeches, and presentations. How can you make them better? No, you can make them better. Number 5, pay attention to the structure of all of your communication. Point first. And number 6, read books on effective communication, like this one. Purchase my synopses on books on communication. Just focusing on this, thinking about it, will make you better at it. Everybody take your pen and add number 7. Here's number 7. This is something you can do starting this afternoon. Read 1 email aloud every day before you hit send. Listen to yourself, read it. Is it making sense? Read 1 email a day, every day, before you hit send. In other words, work on your communication. Well, that's it. I'm 2 minutes over. Smart brevity, the power of saying more with less. Okay, Mike, back to you.
Well, thank you, Randy. And man, I wish we had another 30 minutes to listen to you talk about this. It's a great presentation. And I want to say to those of you that are on, if you have a question, if you'll use the chat box or the Q&A, we'll try to get to it. One thing I want to ask you about, and then I want Krista to join in on this too. This book doesn't really get into the role of stories.
Yeah.
Comment on that. We're here so much about we got to communicate through stories. How do we merge this brevity with the need for stories?
Well, my first comment about stories is, my goodness, that is a whole nother arena. And how do I word this? It's almost impossible to use stories effectively in a short transactional email. You can't, that's not where to use the stories. it is a play. Stories work better for verbal presentations, or if you say up front in an email, I want to share a story with you. I can't do that in 2 or 3 sentences. Please read this story. One of the things that I did not say that the book makes a point of is they're real high on telling people this article will take you 4 minutes to read, 7 minutes to read, 9 minutes to read. So they tell you how much time you're going to have to invest. But Mike, I got to tell you, there is a great book on stories. And the key point of a story is not to tell your story but to help the listener find a way for them to be in the story. And so the book is called Building a Story Brand. It's a wonderful book. And so I encourage everybody to read that. Okay.
Great book. Krista, what's your takeaway from that? And then I see we've got some questions, so we'll get to those. What's your takeaway though, Krista?
Well, I agree. I liked the question you asked about using stories. And it seems like, I mean, this is just my own, personal opinion, but it seems like telling stories that way, like in an email, would be more effective if you know the person really well versus if you don't. Because to me, like if I'm reading a story and taking the time to read that, it helps me to really digest that if I know the person well enough who sent it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Randy, one of the questions we've got is, can you give us an example of an effective PowerPoint kind of based on what this book says?
Basically, they're not high on PowerPoint. So we start with that. And so I go back to what I say, which is use a lot of visuals. And so if you've got an outline, put it on paper and put it in their hands. Don't use the screen to go through your outline because that's deadly dull. And even if you provide a handout in PowerPoint slide format, I'm going to be honest, people don't read those. You got to find a way to entice them to read. So that's my first comment, is use a lot of visuals. But now let me make another comment about PowerPoint. If you are speaking, you want to control as much as possible the eyeball focus of your audience. And so if you've got a slide and you want them looking at the slide, put it up, point to it, and refer to it. And then when you want their focus back on you, darken the screen. Get very good at darkening the screen, because when you leave a slide up where you've gone on to the next point, it is a distraction. And you want to work hard at not being that kind of distraction. So that's another rule about PowerPoint.
Great point. Question for you, Randy, but also for those that are listening. It dawned on me, wow, I wonder if there are any cities or local governments that are using some kind of presentation like this as a part of their onboarding. Do you know of anybody that's doing that, Randy?
I do not.
And if you do know that, anybody put in the chat box, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. I will tell you this, Mike. I work with you at SGR, but I also work kind of in my own life, in my own clients. And I met with a team. Mike, can I have 30 seconds?
Yeah.
All right. Talk for 15 seconds.
Okay. So, Krista, I know you've seen me use the articles, blogs from Dan Rockwell, and his blog is called Leadership Freak, but he only writes 400 words every day, except maybe on the weekend he does more. But he fits exactly what Randy's saying. Okay. You have anybody else like that, Krista, that you look at?
I think Randy fits what Randy is saying. I mean, it's the perfect example of brevity and getting to digest a full book in, a 30, 45-minute time slot. So I mean, that's to me one of the best examples out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. Okay, Mike, I'm ready. I'm going to share this on the screen. I created this years ago. Can you see these bubbles, Mike?
Oh, yes.
Okay. This is something that I created after reading 15 years of business books. Assuming you have on the left these things, look on the right. The healthy and growing organization is constantly adapting and innovating. You start on the top left, you start with why, your meaning, then your strategy, then your leaders, then your team, then your talent, then your alignment, then your communication, and then your execution, measurement, and removing bottlenecks. So I have a client where I met with their executive team and I took them through those bubbles, and I called them bubbles. And I said, where are you weakest here? And they spent 2 hours pounding out where they're weakest. And the first 2 sessions with the executive team were dealing with their communication weaknesses. Wow. So they acknowledge that problem. So we are in the process of creating communication strategies for that company based on their assessment that we have got to beef that up. So that's kind of part of my answer to your question.
Yeah.
So.
It's very, very good and very, very interesting, man. Thank you so much. I really encourage people to grab this book and read it. Sometimes I tease Randy when we've worked together. I'm like, hey, man, you made that book sound a lot more interesting than it really was. But I think in this case, you must really scratch the surface of what that book has to teach us. And man, it's been super, and really appreciate it.
And so let me remind everyone to read the full handout once in the next few days, because if you read all of the best of my highlighted passages, you'll begin to feel like you've got the bulk of the book. So, but of course, it's better to read the book for yourself. So,
yes, yeah. Well, super job, Randy. Thank you so much. Krista, any closing words?
I was just going to remind everyone that registration is now open for early bird registration for the 2025 Servant Leadership Conference. And you could find that information on our website, governmentresource.com. And then also I will include the link for next week's Wednesday webinar, so people can go ahead and register for that as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a great webinar. We've got the city of Waco that's going to be talking to us about their partnership with the Texas State Technical College and the work that they're doing in addressing housing shortages and using students with this. It's a really fascinating story. I can't wait for them to share it. So hope you will join us for that. And as Krista mentioned, the Servant Leadership Conference, January 30th and 31st, right here in the greatest city in the world, Grapevine, Texas. So thanks for
you had to get that in,
everyone.
Mike.
Of course. Thanks to everyone that's made this possible, and to you, especially Randy. Everybody have a great day. We'll see you down the road.
thanks.
Thank you.